Hi everyone, my name is Logan McQuiston and my project is on the effects of pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I've basically grown up in the Chesapeake Bay. My family and I always go down to Maryland and every year for a vacation. Um, we always like to go fishing out there, just boat around the bay, really anything that we can do to get out and get away from our normal lives. But over the years, I have seen what has happened to the bay. I remember as a kid, just seeing the wildlife out there, dolphins swimming by, just all the different types of fish, all the types of birds that are flying by, and all that. And as the years went on, they they just started disappearing, going away. And I always wondered why as a kid, and I always questioned why my parents and my other family members never, oh well, not never, but always told me to stay away from certain areas of the water and you know what to not, I guess, like play with as a kid. You know, just kid, you're explorative. You want to explore everything in your surroundings, but this this bay means a lot to my family and to the families that actually do live on and around the bay. Even talking with locals, I've seen the effects of pollution for this bay and how if we don't do anything soon, it's just going to go away. And there's going to be a loss of economic value, a loss of environmental value, um, just honestly a total loss for humanity if we lose the Chesapeake Bay. So, my objective for this project is to study the different types of pollution that are affecting the Chesapeake Bay and the wildlife that call the bay their home, as well as to take a look at different ways to improve the condition of the Chesapeake Bay. The rationale is knowing how different types of pollution affect the Chesapeake Bay and how they can help better understand and develop methods for cleaning up the bay, understand how these different types of pollution can have irreversible consequences on the Chesapeake Bay, and to better understand the United Nations sustainability goal of life below water. So, the United Nations sustainability goal, life below water, basic overview of it is to conserve the oceans, seas, and the marine resources, and to sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources. My topic relates to Goal 14 of the SDGs because it reflects on the already deplorable conditions of the Chesapeake Bay and how we can come up with sustainable practices to improve its ecosystem. So many people around the world rely on ocean resources or river resources to not only, provide for their family, but to also provide for their country. And if we don't do anything to stop what we are already doing by polluting waterways and oceans, we're going to lose a good portion of our planet. Like, for example, the coral reef, well, not the coral reef, but the Great Barrier Reef out in Australia. That is an amazing area. It's beautiful. Well, it was, but as more and more pollutants enter the water, more and more of the coral is dying off, and it can't support its own ecosystem that it creates. And there isn't really a Great Barrier Reef in or near the Chesapeake Bay, but it's still essentially the same effect that thousands of different creatures that call the Chesapeake Bay their home are dying off because their home is dying. Like it's horrible. So the Chesapeake Bay, a major watershed in the United States. Major. It runs from New York through Pennsylvania, parts of West Virginia, and Delaware. Nearly all of Maryland is a part of this watershed, and a good portion of Virginia is in this watershed. And if you think about it, you know, you have factories and farms in all these states that are essentially, not all of it, but a good portion of it is being dumped and run off into these streams and rivers, and it's all flowing into the Chesapeake Bay, which is eventually going out to the Atlantic Ocean. So one of the main problems of the Chesapeake Bay is agricultural runoff. In the 1600s, the bay had forested buffers, wetlands, and resources lands that absorbed and filtered the nutrients. Haphazard development has stripped the bay of these natural filters, causing pollution to flow undiluted into different waterways. Each year, approximately 300 million pounds of polluting nitrogen reaches the bay. And that's about 6 times the amount that reached the bay in the 1600s. Water quality is so poor that the Chesapeake Bay is listed on the Environmental Protection Agency's Dirty Waters list. Now, this isn't a picture of the Chesapeake Bay, but it's still a great picture to show algal bloom that happens due to excessive nitrogen levels in the water. Now, this will eventually lead to dead zones in the water, which is already plaguing the Chesapeake Bay, as we saw with one of the documentaries we watched for this class. Another major problem is industrial runoff. Industrial runoff accounts for about 15% of the nitrogen and phosphorus pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. And the fact that Baltimore, which is traditionally an industrial city, is in close proximity to the bay leads to an easier transmission of this type of pollution. This picture here shows an example of some industrial runoff. As you can see, there's looks like oil from, could be a car or anything, being drained into a sewer drain, which will eventually lead to the Chesapeake Bay. Another major problem for the Chesapeake Bay is plastic pollution. Now, I've personally seen this while I'm out there. I see plastic bags, plastic straws, now more recently masks because of COVID-19, but just the amount of plastic and just garbage in general that I see out there it's honestly saddening that humans decide to neglect the environment that they are already destroying, because we have to live ourselves, but also, we're destroying so many lives for animals and homes for animals that one day we're never going to see these creatures again if we don't do anything. So samples from the Anacostia River, which eventually flows into the Chesapeake Bay, show that per liter of water there are over 400 pieces of microplastics. Now, we know that microplastics can harm us and our internal organs. So why are we still dumping these in the water if we know they affect us? Then surely we should know that they are going to affect the animals that call the waterways their home. Research done by Christine Knaus shows that microplastics affect the oyster population that calls the Chesapeake Bay their home. Oysters, if you don't already know, have a significant economic, cultural, and environmental significance to this area. Oysters, along with crabs, are one of the biggest exports out of the Chesapeake Bay. One of the biggest. Insane. Basic human neglect has led to the plastic pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. This photo is actually a personal photo that I took. You might be able to see it, but almost in the center of it, there's quite clearly a plastic bag of chips just sitting there on the water's edge. And there's also all that yellow stuff you see there. That's scum. That's toxic material, toxic whatever. That's just sitting there, floating in the water. And I didn't want to touch it, so I know these animals don't want to touch it that live in here. Global impact. Countless fisheries have already closed due to different types of pollutants in the Chesapeake Bay, and countless more will continue to close if nothing is done. The Chesapeake Bay is connected to the Atlantic Ocean, and once the bay dies, it'll start to infect the Atlantic, and it already has started to infect the Atlantic. Millions of dollars of revenue will be lost due to the loss of crabs, oysters, and other commercial fishing animals. The people that call the Chesapeake Bay their home will have to move somewhere else and start a new life if, their source of income dies off. What we can do. When I went to the Chesapeake Bay to get the personal picture, as I showed you earlier, I noticed that in the park that I was, I had to pay to be able to park, which kind of bothered me, but it's whatever. But also, there wasn't a single trash can in sight anywhere throughout this park. Anywhere. Like, I understand it's a state park and it's supposed to be all natural, but if you have humans going through there to view this amazing space, they're gonna have trash with them. And if you don't give them a trash can to throw that trash away, where are they gonna put it? Do you really think that a lot of people are gonna carry their trash back to their cars with them? No, they're just gonna dump it wherever they please, which, again, basic human neglect is one of the key factors to this. One thing that we can do, small, just put trash cans in state parks to cut down on the human neglect. On the bigger scale, we can hold agricultural companies accountable for the proper waste cleanup of their animals. Every year I drive down, either on the left or right side, are just rows and rows and rows of chicken farms. Now, from the documentary we watched earlier this semester, we saw that chicken farms were one of the biggest source pollutants for the Chesapeake Bay, and they still are. Another thing is hold industrial companies responsible for the toxins that are dumped from their facilities into the Chesapeake Bay. And we can also create stricter legislation on different environmental practices to cut down on pollution as a whole. This has been my project on the pollution in the Chesapeake Bay, and I thank you all for listening.